2, 1, you're on.
Good evening. My name is John Buffington. I am the programmer for the Historical Society of Frankfurt. My job is to decide what is going to be a useful topic and who might be a person to represent us on that. Tonight we're doing gerrymandering, the history of gerrymandering. Our guests are from Fair Districts, Pennsylvania, Mary Ann Connolly and John Cromer. They're doing us a big favor because the history of gerrymandering is not their usual topic. Their usual topic is the current situation with gerrymandering and why it needs to be fixed and how it needs to be undertaken. So they agreed to do the research to get the history together for us tonight, and I appreciate that. What they didn't initially agree to do was talk about the two specific gerrymanders that we had here in Frankfurt, that particularly affected voters here in Frankfurt. That was my original purpose in asking for the history of gerrymandering, to put the two times that we've been abused in my particular recollection into a context, a historical context. What we do here at the Historical Society of Frankfurt is to promote and preserve the history of Frankfurt and nearby communities. And we don't do statewide or national issues unless they particularly pertain to Frankfurt. Well, we've been abused twice with national notice because those gerrymanders were so god awful that they made the national news. John Cromer is going to talk about the gerrymandering by Republicans in Harrisburg, mostly Republicans. Now, gerrymanders always depend on whoever benefits in the crowd of people who are in power and want to abuse the people who aren't in power. And in the case of the 177th, in the particular instance, where's my date? Here we go. That one started in that particular person was elected in 1985, but I guess the gerrymander was done to keep him in office a little later than that. John Cromer is going to talk about that with some specificity. I think he has a map. The other one, that's a Republican-led gang of thieves that did that. The other one, however, was a Democratic gang of thieves here in Philadelphia City Council. That happened, the election happened originally, the first election happened in 1996, and that particular city councilman was gerrymandered into a different district for the reason that he was being challenged by a very important local person who had been the president of Northwood Civic Association. And he was very likely to lose the next election. And so the then chair of the redistricting Committee of Philadelphia City Council undertook to keep the guy in office by redistricting us in such a way that Frankfurt's voters were split into two districts, and the district where the guy's name was Fran Hanson's was the challenger. Fran was redistricted out of the district in which he was challenging the incumbent councilman. That lasted until 2018, when that particular councilman went to jail for bribery. The outcome of that was we had this ridiculous pair of districts splitting Frankfurt down the middle for several years, and Frankfurt citizens were deprived of the option of voting against a guy who turned out to be a crook. I can't tell you how much I resent that, because I'm one of the people whose votes were stolen in that matter. And that's why I thought it was important to do the history of those two gerrymanders and then put them in the context of the history of gerrymandering generally. That's what my folks are my guests tonight are mostly going to talk about. So with that, I think Mary Ann Connolly is ready to begin.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to assume that you can see me well, everyone online, and everyone in the audience. So Fair Districts PA kind of started in around 2016. A bunch of good government nonprofits had come together and realized that if they really wanted to see change happen with redistricting, they were going to have to work in a more organized way to help the legislators get that type of legislation through. They had been trying since about throughout the 1990s and had very little success. I'm ready for slide 2. Oh, and the Fair District's website, you can get background, action ideas, news on redistricting from within the state and around the country. And we will have some handouts, and you can sign some petitions if you're interested. So, okay. So this is just our agenda slide. So we're going to cover some current redistricting processes, both for U.S. congressional districts, also for state legislative districts. We're going to go through a little bit of the history of gerrymandering. We're going to look at some problems and proposed fixes, and we're going to give you some action items. So there's two terms that you need to know if you're going to talk about gerrymandering or redistricting. Gerrymandering, really. So you need to know the words reapportionment and redistricting. So we're going to start with reapportionment. So reapportionment is the reassignment of representatives proportionally among the states in accordance with changes in population distribution. So let's break that down. Every 10 years, we have a U.S. Census. Based on the census, the U.S. congressional seats are reapportioned. According to law, there's 435 U.S. congressional seats in the House of Representatives. Those seats are assigned by population. So if a state gains in population during that census, then they're going to gain representatives. And if they lose population during that census, then they're going to lose representatives. PA, compared to other states, has been losing population. In 2010, Pennsylvania lost 1 seat, and in 2020, Pennsylvania lost another seat. So reapportionment happens by law every 10 years after the census. Some states gain, some states lose. Pennsylvania's been losing. So the second word is redistricting. Reapportionment automatically triggers redistricting. So as your loser gains seats statewide, You then have to redraw the district lines to make sure that the districts have equal population. Makes sense, right? So in Pennsylvania, the US congressional districts are redrawn through kind of a standard legislative process. Somewhere in Harrisburg or nearby, there's some really smart map makers with some really good computer programs. And they are figuring out how to best draw those maps to favor the majority party, right? The majority party takes that map, hands it to the legislature passes it on to the governor signs it. If the state legislature and the governor are two different parties, then generally what happens is they pass that map on to the legislature passes it, they pass it on to the governor vetoes it, and then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court draws the lines. Oh, yeah. What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good? Okay. So the state legislative process is different. We have the LRC, or the State Legislative Reapportionment Commission. That's made up of 5 members, 2 members from two leading members from both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Then you have a fifth person who's the chairman. Theoretically, the Republicans and the Democrats, the 2 on each side, decide together who they're going to pick, which pretty much never happens. And so then again, I think it's the PA Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Yep, chooses that 5th person. So who's on the LRC? Who's on the Legislative Redistricting Commission? So past commissions were pretty white and pretty male. They've gotten a little bit diverse, a little more diverse in this past commission. In 2021, Kim Ward was the majority leader of the Senate, and Joanna McClinton was the majority leader of the House. So we got 2 women on board, 1 a woman of color. They really needed diversity. Of course, they didn't agree on a chair. The Supreme Court, knowing that Pennsylvania was watching, chose Mark Nordenberg, who was pretty lauded by both parties. So that went over well. So the LRC, the Legislative Redistricting Commission, does have to follow certain rules when they are drawing up those districts. So I'm just going to read this to you what the state constitution says. It's up on the screen. The Commonwealth shall be divided into 50 senatorial and 203 representative districts, which shall be composed of compact and contiguous territory. You're going to see how important that is when John does his piece of the lecture. As nearly equal in population as practicable, unless absolutely necessary. No county, city, incorporated town, borough, township, or ward shall be divided in forming either a senatorial or a representative district. Prior to 2020, these rules were not followed. So it's important to note that there's no legislative process here, right? There's not going to be any vote in the House and Senate. The governor's not going to sign any bill. This commission has complete power over drawing up those legislative districts. So let's now move on to gerrymandering. So gerrymandering, and again, I'm going to give you a definition, is the manipulating of electoral maps for political advantage. It's a conflict of interest that threatens the integrity of our elections. So one of the earliest people to take advantage of this was Governor Elbridge Gerry. So in the 1800s, he approved some pretty wild districts. And a reporter thought that the district that you see up on the screen right now looked a lot like a salamander. And so that's how we got the term gerrymander. Even though his name is really Elbridge Gerry, it's become gerrymandering. So what's important to know about gerrymandering, and John will talk more about this as well, is that the same people who draw the districts, draw the lines, right, as we just discussed, They have a vested interest in creating districts that'll help them stay in office. So let's just think about that for a minute, right? What we need to kind of fully understand is that gerrymandering allows our elected representatives, our elected legislators, to choose their voters rather than the other way around. So we lose our voice. So let's get some history on, other than Governor Gerry. So let's talk about, although Governor Gerry was credited with the first gerrymander, the stage was kind of set for this kind of manipulation long before. So the picture that you see there right now, it's Old Sarum in Wiltshire. This is in the UK. It's an uninhabited hill, which until 1832 elected 2 members to Parliament. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that worked. So we're going to talk about rotten and pocket boroughs in England. A rotten or pocket borough was a name for certain types of parliamentary boroughs in England. Parliamentary borough was a town that had been incorporated under a royal charter, giving it the right to send 2 members to Parliament, 2 members of Parliament to their legislator, to the House of Commons, right? So for centuries, district electing members to the House did not change based on their population shifts. So they didn't have some of the things in place that we have now. So again, Old Sarum had been this very busy cathedral city in the 12th century. Then they decided to move the cathedral to New Sarum. When they moved the cathedral, the people moved too. But they never changed the districts. So this hill, basically, practically uninhabited, was controlled by one landowning family that still got to send 2 MPs to the House of Commons. And at the same time, a lot of new towns that had really grown, had really increased their population, were entirely unrepresented or very underrepresented. So a really good example is Manchester, which, you know, during the Industrial Revolution just like exploded with population and industry. But until 1832, it was just part of Lancashire. Did not elect its own MPs. So on the one hand, you have areas where the population has completely shifted and there's no one living there. And so that area gets to have 2 MPs controlled by one landowning family. And on the other hand, you have these townships that, you know, exploded and yet don't really get any representation. And those are the ones that we would describe as a rotten borough. So a pocket borough were boroughs that could be controlled by a single person who owned at least half of the tenements. So in these boroughs, often one person could buy up most of the housing in that area, and most of the people who were not landowners rented from them. However, they did not have they didn't have a secret ballot. So everybody knew how they voted. So if a renter voted against the person that the owner of the tenement wanted, they just kicked them out. So those were situations where those boroughs were considered to be in the pocket of the landowner, hence pocket boroughs. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, they never redistricted till, I don't know, 1832. But by 1831, which is right before they did a little bit of change, of the 406 elected members, 152 were chosen by fewer than 100 voters each. And 88 were chosen by fewer than 50 voters. So rotten and pocket boroughs existed for centuries. It kind of improved with the Reform Act of 1832 when representation started to get redistributed to kind of major population centers, but it was actually pretty completely abolished with the Reform Act of 1867 because secret ballots were introduced. So setting the stage for gerrymandering in America. So in America, the founding fathers, they recognized the importance of reapportionment, right? So what was happening in those boroughs was that people moved and they never took into account that people moved in and out, right? So there was no reapportionment. So the founding fathers, they kind of understood that we had to have reapportionment so that each state had the appropriate number of members in Congress, right? But they only did it state to state. What we talked about was every 10 years, if you gain population, you gain representatives. If you lose population, you lose representatives, right? That's reapportionment. But for over a century, if reapportionment wasn't necessary in your state, so if your state really didn't significantly gain or lose population, they never redrew those lines. So you ended up with kind of similar to what happened in the UK, very lopsided districts, right? Many states just assigned representation by county, or instead of or in addition to population. So they just didn't really change things, right? So here's some examples, which I think are fascinating, of how the lack of redistricting played out. Prior to 1962, in Tennessee, was electing state legislators based on a map drawn in 1901. Population had grown from 500,000 to nearly 2.1 million, and people had moved from rural areas into urban areas. This is all in Tennessee. So one vote in a rural county was equal to 19 votes in an urban county. In Vermont, the most populous state legislative district had 987 times more people than the least populous district. In Nevada, the state Senate, the smallest district was 568 people. The largest had 127,000 people. And in Texas, one congressional district had a population of nearly 952,000, while another had a population of just over 216,000. So you can really hear, right, that you can have reapportionment, but if you're not redistricting in addition to the reapportionment, then you're still going to end up with really lopsided districts. So let's just talk a little bit about Pennsylvania during that time. So in Pennsylvania, what they did was they had the districts divided by county. All counties got at least one representative. No county got more than 4 representatives. So let's see what that would be like today. So Fulton County has about 14,500 people, and they get 1 state rep. Philadelphia County, which is over 100 times more populous than Fulton County, they have 1.576 million people, would get 4 reps. So even though it's 100 times more populous, they only get 4 reps rather than 1. So how did we move? How did the U.S. start to move from this really uneven redistricting to something a little closer to 1 person, 1 vote? So in the early 1960s, the Supreme Court, which was the Warren Court, heard and decided a number of cases about redistricting that pretty much established more or less 1 person, 1 vote, or at least the courts say it. So prior to 1962, the federal courts refused to hear redistricting cases at all. They felt that it was a political question. There's a cat coming into your building. It was a political question, and it was unsuitable for interference by the court. Let me just run down quickly these cases. So Baker versus Carr in 1962, a landmark case in terms of redistricting, established that the 14th Amendment enabled federal courts to hear redistricting cases. So keep in mind that Tennessee, as I talked about earlier, had not redistricted since 1901. In Westbury versus Sanders in 1964, this was in Georgia, they then said that the U.S. congressional districts must be roughly equal in population. So the first case, right, is saying, yes, you can bring cases about redistricting. And the second case is saying, this is what we mean when we bring these redistricting cases to the court. In Reynolds versus Sims in 1964, state legislative districts had to be roughly equal in population. So it was Baker versus Carr that allowed these other cases to come forward to the federal courts and to have redistricting implemented, right, more effectively. So then there's the 1968 Pennsylvania Constitution. So what's interesting is that the 1968 Legislative Modernization Commission, which really was looking at the legislature and how to modernize it and make it kind of less in the pocket of big oil, big
Gas and oil?
Gas and oil, right? So they're trying to get it out of the pockets of gas and oil. That Legislative Modernization Commission was approved by General Assembly members from districts that had been drawn, right, really because of that 1962 court case. So in Pennsylvania, those districts were redrawn, and it allowed, at that time at least, those legislators to say, yes, we want to look at our legislature and see how we can improve it. As a result, the House was set at 203 members, fixed size. The Senate was fixed at 50. And this is the same commission that started the LRC, the Legislative Redistricting Commission, which at the time was really considered a reform because it took that decision-making out of the individual politicians. We don't think of it quite as much as a reform now, but at the time it was considered a reform. So establishing that state legislative districts had to be roughly equal in population was a really important reform, right? I think that's pretty clear. But in and of itself, it doesn't prevent gerrymandering. And this is the part that John is going to talk about. You have to turn this towards you.
Okay. Well, imagine that this room is a legislative district and the people on this side are likely to vote for me, and the people on that side may not be so interested in voting for me. Then with the ability to gerrymander, I can draw a boundary of the district right down the aisle here and take in more voters who support me and leave these other voters who don't like me in another district, increasing the chances that I'm going to win the election. There are different ways of doing this. You can see on the left hand, on the far left, if you had a district in which 60% of the voters are blue and 40% are red, if you don't fool around with the district boundaries, then the blue district is going to win. However, if you divide that district into 5 pieces and include the voters in other districts, then you have a more compact district, but you still have an unequal distribution of voters. And it's in those 5 cases, blue is always going to be likely to win. You can also play around with the boundaries and configure the district in different ways. At the very top, on the upper right, there's a district in which red is going to win. And then, on your left, on the right, a district in which blue is going to win. But you could see this is not a great way to honor the democratic process. So in addition, I can reach an agreement with one of my fellow legislators on how a certain area of the city or state will have its district lines redrawn so that, as in this example, he will be likely to win and I will be likely to win as well. If you look at the image on the right-hand side, there's the district on the bottom where blue wins and the district on top where red is going to win almost every time. So that's not too difficult to do in a place like Pennsylvania. In addition, it's possible to split up a district and spread its voters among several other districts so that the number of voters in a particular district becomes a minority and the majority vote comes from elsewhere. In addition, another strategy is concentrating voters who belong to one party, one group, in as few districts as possible, so that that group will win a certain number of elected officials, but not their fair share, because all of their votes have been concentrated in a single geographic area. So, and this is the result. You get really weird configurations that are drawn in a way that favors the incumbent or the politically powerful person. This congressional district from Pennsylvania on your left, which has been characterized as goofy kicking Donald Duck, was drawn in a way to ensure that one particular member of Congress would be reelected. They just identified likely voters for this politician and drew a crazy looking district that would include as many of those voters as possible. This is not a Republican strategy. It's been honored by Democrats as well. And the other image shows a congressional district in New York. Look at how that's configured. Again, they came up with a crazy way of drawing the lines in order to ensure that as many voters as possible who favored a particular incumbent would be included in the district. So the result of this goofy kicking Donald situation is that in this particular district, although roughly an equal number of votes was cast in the 2016 election, there it is on the left-hand side, that pie chart, the winners were overwhelmingly of one party because of the way that this district had been configured. So that's why maps are important, and that's why Fair Districts has been working on a process that produces fair maps that are not configured in a way that guarantees that a particular person will always win or a particular party, and that different constituencies are fairly represented. During 2021, under the leadership of Judge Nordenberg as head of the Legislative Redistricting Committee, there was a statewide remapping process, and Judge Nordenberg hired his own mapper, a person with computer mapping skills who would look at the demographics and look at the populations of different areas of Pennsylvania and consider how the maps could be redrawn in a way that would be as fair as possible to as many people as possible. Fair Districts PA is a statewide organization. It's all volunteer, it's all nonpartisan, but in publicizing the opportunity to participate as members of the public in this redrawing of the maps, Fair District was able to attract a lot of interest from all over the state. And the organization has membership in every district in Pennsylvania. Some of those members are also mapping experts. And so it was possible during 2021 to have Zoom calls and to have meetings and look at the alternatives and ask the experts just to draw and redraw different districts to see how, in as many cases as possible, the new districts could be compact and not spread all over the place. The new districts could fairly represent citizens, residents of particular neighborhoods or particular constituencies, and would make more sense in that way. And the results weren't perfect, but they were very good with respect to the Pennsylvania House. On your left is the before picture of the 177th House District. On your right is the picture after redistricting. And I think you can see what I mean by compact. With the image on your left, look at that little point that's sticking up like a beak. You know, think of the voters who are living in that little area. They are almost completely surrounded by voters who are represented by a totally different state representative. So getting together and talking with your neighbors about your elected officials isn't too easy for the people that live in that little pointy area, or even the area that's in the upper right part of the image. Again, the results that you see on your right are not perfect, but they're different than they had been and a lot more compact than had been the case. Here's the 179th, same thing. See how this district on the left is spread out over quite a distance so that the voters on the left end, the left boundary, really aren't going to be very well acquainted with those on the right. And that's too bad, because when they're configured well, a lot of the voters can get acquainted with each other and be aware of their common concerns and work together to make sure that they are represented as fairly as possible. And the map on the right reflects an attempt to do that and to make a change from a very drawn out district on the left to something a little bit better in terms of representation. Same thing here. Look at that pointy area on the lower right-hand side of the image on the left, and those two spikes on the left-hand side of the image. You know, this district was drawn all over the place in order to make sure that it encompassed as many voters who were favorable to the incumbent as possible. And again, that's not very helpful to the voters who need to share their common concerns and need to feel that they're represented by one House member rather than a particular House member on this side of the street and a totally different one on the other side of the street. And to have communities like Frankfurt split up so that you have multiple state representatives, again, is not the ideal thing. It does happen. There are difficult decisions that have to be made, but at least the outcome is more like what you see on the right than what you see on the left. There's a lot more work to do, but this is an example of what happened after a first attempt to straighten out a longstanding problem. We're not the only ones that are concerned about this. On a national level, groups that evaluate the performance of state governments give Pennsylvania an F for integrity in terms of campaign financing, donations, and the access that lobbyists have to elected officials, and in terms of funds and fundraising for political campaigns. Another concern that relates to this issue of representation is the question of, what do these people actually do in Harrisburg? You know, what does the House actually accomplish? You may have heard a little bit about the chaos that's going on, not only in the US Congress, but in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. We're 4 months past the deadline for approving a budget, and there's no end in sight. You know, why does that have to be the case? In Maryland, all of the members of the state legislature are part-time, and they work between January and April, and they're done in April. The budget is improved, and they go home for the rest of the year. Our legislators are full-time. Here's what happens in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. In the most recently completed session, on your left is the number of bills that were introduced during this 2-year session, over 4,000. And you probably, I can't read them very well. This was a time in which the Republicans had a majority in both the House and Senate. And as you can see, Republican bills represented, shaded in red, were the ones that got closest to reaching final approval. Most Democratic bills, the blue, went nowhere. They went to committee, and as time went on, they were never referred out of committee or never given a vote on a final vote on the floor. So the result was all Republican bills made it to final approval, and 235 of those, 293 of those were approved. So that's about 300 bills out of more than 4,000 that were introduced. Some of those 4,000 bills probably weren't very good and should not have been approved, but still you might want to have a legislature that would have a better record than that. And that's the situation we're in part because one party, and it's been the Democrats in the past, as well as the Republicans, when it's in control, will do things its own way without regard to the public interest too frequently. So that's where we're at now. The House of Representatives was designed to be the people's house. We're not there now. The problem is when the leaders draw the district boundaries and distort them in a way that is pictured in the images I showed you, then the majority political leaders, the majority caucus leaders decide what's good, what gets voted on and what doesn't. And as a result, you don't get any reform and you get the kind of performance that was shown in the previous slide. So what we're trying to do is to let more people know that this is going on, get them to understand a little bit about the issues. Gerrymandering is not the most thrilling, exciting topic you ever heard of. Somebody is yawning already. I'm shocked. But we've succeeded in mobilizing people from all over the state, in part by getting them to sign petitions like this one that just says, I'm concerned about this. I want to keep in touch. And you'll hear from us maybe once a month with some news about what's going on. There are opportunities to volunteer with fair districts. We're working now on polling place outreach, where a volunteer will be at your polling place, maybe it's you, and after people have voted, as they're walking away, asking them if they're concerned about gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. And if they are, just giving them this handout with some information and a link to more information. So it's easy to do. Again, we're all volunteers, so there are a million different opportunities to participate, not every week, but at times when it's helpful to sign a petition or show up at a polling place or come to a meeting like this one and just have a conversation. These things add up as a result of the redistricting that was done in 2021 to 22 and authorized in 2022. 23 seats in the House turned over. 23 representatives lost their job because of the election. Most of them were Republicans because the Republicans had controlled the House previously and had gerrymandered things their own way. If the House had been controlled by Democrats, I expect you would have seen 23 Democrats losing their seats as well. But that's a powerful change, and it wasn't all because of fair districts, but the fact that this organization shone a lot of light on the process and provided an opportunity for people to get access to these computer mapping experts who could explain what it meant to reconfigure districts and come up with recommendations that actually represented the interests of people who lived here and voted here, that really made a big difference at the polling place. So this is going to be a long haul. Other states are working on this problem. Some of them have been very successful. Others are still struggling. One state that's frequently cited as a model is California, which has an independent redistricting committee, which draws the lines after years in which party leaders control that process. The struggle to authorize that independent redistricting commission took time because the political parties, both of them, didn't want to see a change. And lest you think that these were all Republicans that were complaining, the politician that led the opposition was Nancy Pelosi, the head of the Democrats. She was against changing the congressional district boundaries. But the people decided otherwise. The independent commission redrew the maps, and the public, a great majority of the public, was satisfied with the results. So it can happen. It's not easy. It's not going to happen this year and next year, but there are things that we can do step by step that can result in some changes that to the situation that we care about for our sake and for the sake of voters who are going to follow us. We've got a lot of supporters around Pennsylvania, those red blotches. Each of them, I think, is an individual volunteer who's working all over Pennsylvania. We've got a big concentration at southeastern Pennsylvania. It's not just in Philadelphia. You can see it goes up to Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, and covers Allegheny County. But we've got people who are working in rural areas as well as in smaller cities like Lancaster and New York. So this is catching on, and for a group that is less than 10 years old, we've made some good progress, I think. And that progress comes from just talking to people at the polls and at festivals and fairs, getting volunteers to collect petitions, getting them to show up when we have an event in Harrisburg or locally, and just to share information anywhere people gather and are interested in conversation. So that's how it's done, and that's why we're here. I hope this has been helpful to you, and there's more information on the table. Thank you. And we kept the cat out.
You did very well. Thank you.
You see?
Do we have questions from the audience that's present? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, but as you already know, I'm not good at that. Is there any lessons learned from anybody else, anything that we can do, saying they can slightly cut donations so people, like, I think there's no requirement for reporting, if somebody buys you tickets to a Dodger game or something, they say, okay, well, at least you have to report if some lobbyist is taking out lunch, and even if there's no limit on that, and not the legality, there's anything you can do to push people in the right direction, that's how small things can get done. Improvement.
You want to take that, John?
Oh, fine.
I can stand up.
Please do.
The opportunity is to change.
Excuse me. The remote audience can't necessarily hear what's said from the audience. So
okay.
I need the answer to start with repeating questions.
All right. I hope I've got this right. I think the question was about whether what could be done to change the rules, or whether something could be done about lobbyists who influence the politicians to do what they do. Is that at least part of it?
I think that as an example, so say there's no requirement to, like somebody set flies into Aruba, there's no requirement to even report it, you may be able to get through the speech rights and everything, well, there's no limit on the top, so it's not illegal, it's not, at least you have to report it now publicly if you're being lobbied on.
That's right, and it really relates to at least two things. One is campaign contributions, which can be unlimited in Pennsylvania. You know, you can come in with a bag of money and make a gift to an elected official. So that's a big problem. And the other related issue is the influence of lobbyists. There are really no serious standards that limit the activity of lobbyists. They have to register, but they can do all kinds of things on behalf of elected officials that are not permitted in other states. The root cause of all this is the rules of the legislature, which are approved at the beginning of every legislative session. The legislative session is 2 years long, and we're in the first year of the 2023 to 24 session. At the very first meeting of the House and Senate, a vote is taken on the rules to approve the rules or not. And the rules are published. They're online. You can see what they are. But the vote is taken very quickly, and the rules are distributed to the members at the last minute. And the members are told, particularly the new ones, just raise your hand. You've got to do this to vote for our leadership or to get things started here. There really has never been any real debate over the rules, and the result is that the same rules that have favored the incumbents and the powerful people have been approved every year at that first meeting. After that, it's too late, really. Attempts to amend the rules have failed every time. So one of the challenges is trying to find an opportunity to make this known, to make more people aware that the rules are unfair and need to be changed in some ways the way they exist in other states that have functioned perfectly well with fair rules, and to influence enough legislators to make some changes. They're not going to do that out of the goodness of their hearts. So it's going to take some work, but that is really the cause of this problem.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
I have one online question. That I'd like
Sure.
to pass on. Someone asked, what is the definition of fair? Compact doesn't help with that. Because he's looking at the definition that's
Repeat, please.
yeah. So the question was, what is the definition of fair? And a question about how does compact make it fair? And I think that when a district is compact, then you're not snaking around just in order to collect certain voters in certain areas. There have been districts where they're literally one side of the street is one and the other side of the street is the other, and the district is like, only it's tiny. So I think that that's how I would say it. John may have a different approach, but they're trying to represent voters in a specific district without carving up so that they can choose their voters. Is that fair?
Sure. If you have a district in which some of the voters are living in Philadelphia and other voters are living in Bucks County, and it's possible to do that, then our view is that's not as fair as it needs to be. In some cases, you have to cross municipal boundaries or county boundaries, but to do that routinely really is not something we consider fair. A redrawing of the maps that excludes certain communities or certain individuals, certain types of voters, Latino voters, Black voters, or members of a certain neighborhood community by dividing up the community so that there aren't enough of those voters to constitute a majority and elect a person that represents their interests. that is also unfair. And again, it's not going to be possible in a state like Pennsylvania to draw the line so that every district is going to be totally fair. There are going to be districts that aren't as compact as many people would like, and that don't do as good a job of representing all of the different constituencies that make up a city or a neighborhood as some people would like. But this is an improvement. And again, this is attempt number one to be fair. So to be briefer, compact means creating an area that's not extended over a large geography so that most people in the area can become acquainted with one another and be represented by the same elected official.
Keep your seat. Keep your seat. Getting back to the effect of this process on us here in Frankfurt. That 177th district redistricting, as I understand it, you're telling us that it was the product of a commission which had 2 Republican representatives, 2 Democratic representatives, and the 5th member was designated by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court at that time was bent which way?
It was Democratic, but
it was Democratic.
Right.
Okay, so that particular case was a democratically tilted gerrymandering.
Well, I think you can judge for yourself whether it was better than the maps that existed previously. What was unusual about Judge Nordenberg was he was dean of the University of Pittsburgh Law School. He had been in private practice, and he had represented both Republicans and Democrats, and his record had been praised by both parties. It wasn't someone who was automatically going to favor one party or the other. And I think you'd find that the maps are reflective of that.
But isn't that a kind of ridiculous looking map that was adopted back then?
The old maps, yes, they're very ridiculous.
Well, was that Judge Nordenberg?
No, that was what came before him.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
Our redistricting, which was, what did I say, 19... The what? Oh, here we go. 1980. Okay, that particular state rep was elected in 1985. So this would be the redistricting, the next redistricting after that. What do they do? I guess would it be 1990 and then the subsequent redistricting?
Prior to last year, the process was mostly conducted behind closed doors. And so even the rank and file members of the General Assembly were told, here's the map. Raise your hand to approve it.
Okay, so it was a mystery who did
Very
that
much.
to us.
Right. And that's the way they like it.
Okay, this is what I guess I'm mad about. Okay, all right, and you're telling me I can't find anybody to blame in particular.
Well, it kind of doesn't matter because this is a bipartisan problem. You know, I could say that one party was to blame. That might be great, but it's not the case.
Okay.
No, politicians want to hold on to their power.
All right, now, any other further questions from the floor here? Or for that matter, from remote at the moment? One last thing then, about the local one that I talked about.
Mhm.
Here in Philadelphia, the state has delegated to Philadelphia City Council the ability to redistrict the city in their own interest.
Exactly.
And the one that infuriates me happened in we're clearly a democratically tilted city. We have 5-1 Democratic to Republican registration. The only reason we have a surviving Republican Party in the city is that the city charter gives the second largest vote receiving party a couple of guaranteed seats on city council. So there's an incentive for currently the Republican Party to be the tail of the Democratic Party's dog. And in that particular case, where we had a guy who was about to be kicked out of office and city council redistricted us to keep him in office, that was definitely a democratically led thing. That particular chairman of that particular committee of Philadelphia City Council went on to a long career as the president of the Philadelphia City Council and just retired last year. And upon retirement was named by the governor to a commission where he gets outrageous pay for a part-time job as a commissioner. So this stuff continues forever.
And it will unless the public gets in the way.
Well, I want to see some public response. Now, does fair districts have an agenda for how that can happen apart from let's all howl? Are there legislative changes that you'd like to see happen?
Well, if you sign the petition, you'll be on our list to receive bulletins. We don't deal with Philadelphia City Council, but we've been working very hard with the Pennsylvania House. And a lot of members of the House are not thrilled with the current status quo. So we're trying to see.
Here we go.
If we can start with that.
Here we go. Is it possible for fair districts to maintain a roster of the people who want to see change in members of the state house that want to see change and the members that are stuck in the mud?
Well, it's the approach that we've taken is to try to find legislators that support bipartisan legislation.
Which is good.
Bills that are introduced with the support of both parties that eventually go nowhere. And, bills related to public school funding, they relate to the safety of childcare facilities. They relate to support for nurse practitioners, bread and butter type issues. And we found that to be more constructive than, identifying the heroes and villains. The public can do that to the extent they want to, but our goal really is to see good legislation passed.
I want to.
Okay, you'll know how to do that.
But I have to do that independent of fair districts.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We are.